Everybody, welcome back to another episode of Shifty's 49ers Talk. So in today's video, we are going to be continuing our mini-series talking about the most interesting and intriguing training camp battles for the Niners this year. In this video, we're going to be looking at and staying on the defensive side of the ball, focusing on the defensive end position. Now, I think 3 of our 4 starting defensive ends are fairly obvious. Nick Bosa, Eric Armstead, Javon Kinlaw. So who's going to be the 4th guy who starts? So there really is 2 ways to look at this. So the first is going to be who will actually be starting the games and being out there on more, potentially obvious running downs, but will also need to be able to rush the passer. That's going to be the first part of the video. The second part of the video is who's going to be out there playing opposite of Bosa when it comes to 3rd and medium, 3rd and long, potentially 2nd and long, 4th quarters, games on the line, things of that nature. So in the first part of the video, there's 3 guys we're going to be looking at. First is going to be Jordan Willis. Second is going to be Charles Omenihu. And third is going to be Kerry Hyder Jr. Let's not waste any time. Let's get into it. So looking at Jordan Willis, he is someone who we traded for from the New York Jets in 2020. Overall with the 49ers, he's played in 17 games. He's had 5.5 sacks with the 49ers, 10 quarterback hits, and a huge thing which could potentially help his case is that so far with the Niners, he's only had 1 missed tackle, and that's really important, especially when you're defending the run game. Now, if we look at his size, he's got ideal size for the position that we're going to be asking him to play. 6'4", 270, so he's one of those guys who can, take on blockers, break away, make a tackle on a running back. He's 27 years old, so he's really about just to hit his prime and peak in terms of his playing career. And there's a couple of things I do like about Willis. So he's definitely familiar with the scheme. He's played in, including playoffs, he's appeared in about 20 games now for the 49ers, so he's very familiar with our coaching staff, with the scheme, and what's expected of him in order to perform in the defense. If we were to look at other things that really help him out too, is that for his size, very athletic. Now, it's a little misleading to look at his combine numbers because back then, he was about 15 to 20 pounds lighter, but he was a 3rd-round pick, so he definitely had potential, coming out of college, Kansas State, if I'm not mistaken, and he's performed very well since, coming to the 49ers in fairly limited time. Now, the one thing that's going to maybe play against him is that the fact that in his, career, he only has 2 starts, so to go from being a consistent, rotational guy to now just jump up into a starter, it would require him to perform incredibly well in training camp and also in preseason. I'm not putting it beyond him because it's not like he's challenging necessarily like a Pro Bowl or an All-Pro guy. It's going to be very difficult though. And I think the great thing is looking at all 3 of these guys is that they're all in contract years, so they're going to be out to really, get those snaps in so they can earn a big payday next offseason. Overall, it's going to be really interesting. Can Jordan Willis make it happen? Ultimately, I don't think it will. Maybe he'll get a start here and there depending on injuries and things like that. I don't know if he'll actually win the starting spot, but I think he will be, definitely a prominent feature in regards to the rotational game because we rotate guys in and out all game long, and always we're going to see him on special teams too. We know what he did against Green Bay, one of the best moments of the season last year. Next up is going to be Charles Omenihu. He's someone who we traded for from the Houston Texans last year. Again, prototypical size here, maybe even bigger, 6'5", 280. So he's a really big athletic guy, and he's going to be 25 years old come the start of the season, entering his 4th year in the NFL. So he's still definitely got room to grow. Now, what I like about Omenihu is that, look, when he first came over to the 49ers last year, took him a little while to get acclimated, and that's to be expected. He's a young player coming to a new situation, new coaching staff, new scheme, to be expected. But what I really liked was the fact that, especially come playoff time, is when he really stepped up. So in very limited snaps in those 3 games, 1.5 sacks, 4 quarterback hits. So you could see that he developed his game and really, flourished, you could say almost, under the coaching of Chris Kasarik. Now, here's the thing when it comes to Omenihu is that he's still very young, and similarly to Jordan Willis, he just doesn't have that experience in terms of being an every down starter like some other guys like Kerry Hyder, for example. So when it comes to Omenihu, it's going to be all about potential. Now, if you look at some of his videos, man, he is putting in work this offseason. He's going to be in fantastic shape, so that's really promising. but he's going to really just have to dominate in training camp. He's going to have to dominate in preseason if he really wants to be the day one starter at defensive end. I think, ultimately it's going to come down to a fact that he just doesn't have the experience of being there. But again, he'll be featured prominently in the rotational game. But not only that, I think as the season goes along, and maybe, we have our bye week essentially right in the middle of the season, what I could see is potentially the second half of the season, maybe he takes that job and just doesn't give it up. I really am excited, and this is going to be one of the big positions I'll be looking at come training camp and come preseason games. So it's going to be exciting. And here's, one of the things too, when you look at a guy like Omenihu, and I know these are not gospel by any means, but Pro Football Focus, 67.7 rating last year. So not too bad. There's definitely a lot of potential with Omenihu. Now, the third guy that we are going to be talking about in this video is Kerry Hyder Jr., a very familiar face with the Niners. So, again, that size is great. 6'2", 275, a little bit older than the other guys. He's 31 years old, but we've seen what he can do under the tutelage of Chris Kasarik in this defensive scheme. So, in 2020, 8.5 sacks, 18 quarterback hits, 10 tackles for loss, 15 hurries, only an 11% missed tackle rate, and that is something which is really, really significant, and where he'll have an advantage over guys like Omenihu, who had a 25% missed tackle rate in limited time. Now, what I like about Hyder and why I think he's probably the favorite to get that starting spot is going to be in 2020. He started 14 games for the 49ers and played very, very well that year. It was definitely a bit of a bummer to lose him to Seattle, but I think this just speaks to the coaching of Kasarik and just how much of a scheme fit that Kerry Hyder is because he didn't really play that well in Seattle, kind of struggled. But in this scheme and with this coaching, he really does flourish. Even with his time with Kasarik before in 2016, he had 8 sacks that year. If we can get that kind of production again, I'll really happily take that to the bank. Now, overall, I think you just have to say that Hyder is the most likely guy come week one because he has all those things. He has the production, he has the familiarity, he has the experience. So I think when it comes to week one at Chicago, the starting defensive line, the first snap of the season on defense, it's going to be Bosa, Armstead, Kinlaw, and Kerry Hyder, and I think it's a really solid defensive line. One of my favorite things with the Niners, though, the defensive line is just how deep it is. Like you talk about, Omenihu, you talk about Jordan Willis, and then the other guys, the other edge players too, and it's just we're stacked. So that's something that you have to have, especially in a 17-game season. And then, of course, we have aspirations to make the playoffs, so that could be 20-plus games or so. You have to be able to be deep in the position, which we certainly are, and we're talented with star players. So I think this is going to be a crazy good battle. Definitely, folks, I would recommend everyone keep an eye on the defensive end position, how things are shaping out in training camp, because it's going to be a great, fierce battle. Now, for the second part of this video, we're going to be talking about the more edge rushers who will be, playing opposite of Nick Bosa in those more obvious passing down situations, third and medium, third and long, fourth quarter, key moments, 2-minute drills, things of that nature. So there's really 4 guys that I want to spotlight here. The first guy that we're going to talk about is going to be rookie Drake Jackson, second round pick out of USC. I thought it was a very good pick. I think a pick that will ultimately pay dividends, especially in 2023, 2024. Now, when we look at him, he's got prototypical size, and that's a big key that the Niners are able to do is to find the guys who just fit our schemes very well. 6'3", 254, 34-inch arms, very, very impressive size there from Drake Jackson. Now, in terms of what his abilities are, he's very athletic, excellent bend. We see a guy like Dee Ford, who we're going to talk about a little later, have that kind of move to be able to stay low when he's rushing the passer, so it's really hard for those bigger, taller offensive linemen to really get a hold on Drake Jackson. Really good quickness, excellent burst off the line, which you love to see. He does need to work on a few counter moves, refinement in just terms of being able to use his hands. He's certainly not on the level of a guy like Nick Bosa coming out of college, but I think with, excellent coaching, he fits perfectly in this scheme. And here's the thing too, is that, he will not be the focus when it comes to the 49ers defense. So opposing offenses aren't going to be like Drake Jackson, like what happened at USC. A lot of times I felt like USC, they weren't really using him as he maybe could have been in order to maximize his potential. A lot of only 3 down linemen, and at his size, you really need that 4th guy to help occupy, a lot of those like bigger offensive linemen. So I think in this scheme he can really flourish. Plus the fact that other, opposing offenses are going to worry about Nick Bosa, Eric Armstead, all-pro linebacker Fred Warner, Dre Greenlaw, all those other guys. So he'll just be able to be like, go after him, get the pass rusher. Now, with all that being said, I don't think early on we're going to see a ton of Drake Jackson, maybe 5-10-ish snaps a game, in those very obvious passing down situations. But I don't think he'll be the guy, especially early on, that we'll primarily see out there on those big key situations. Next up, we have Kemoko Turay. He's someone who we signed as a free agent from the Indianapolis Colts, former 2nd-round pick, and I liked him coming out of Rutgers. As a 2nd-round pick, I don't know, maybe you would have thought a 4th-round pick, but that prototypical size yet again. I think he's someone, though, who would not be out there consistently. So talking about Drake Jackson, maybe 5 to 10 snaps a game, I think Turay is more like a 15-ish snaps a game guy. Now, when looking through Turay, and I wasn't too familiar with him and how his NFL career went so far, last year, 5.5 sacks in 13 games, so not too bad there. It seems like he will be good, and he'll have maybe 2, 3, 4, prominent games, and then kind of disappear in a lot of the other games. So last year it was against Miami, 2 sacks, number of quarterback hits. Last year against the Texans, 2 sacks, a number of quarterback hits as well. Beyond that, though, it was kind of slim pickings. So I think what we'll probably see out of Turay is maybe there will be 3, 4 games this year where we're like, wow, this guy's fantastic. And then we could go a number of games where he's somewhat like invisible and not really making, a huge impact on the game. Now, hopefully he can prove me wrong. And again, in this scheme, with this great coaching, that he can maybe flourish and, unleash potential that we haven't seen before. He is entering his 5th year in the league, and he has missed quite a bit of time with injury in his 2nd and 3rd season. So maybe there's still some untapped potential there with Turay. And look, he's in a contract year. He's going to be looking to get a big deal next offseason because he's still fairly young. He's only 27, so he'll be looking to have a Arden Key-esque type season, in my opinion, where he can then go on, get a bigger contract elsewhere, or potentially remain with the 49ers. We'll see about that. Now, the third guy we're going to talk about is, the much maligned Dee Ford. Now, he's someone who, his talent is, unquestionable. We know how good Dee Ford can be. Obviously, one of the biggest abilities in the NFL is availability. He simply doesn't have it. We know all the issues with his back. He's not out there. It's still interesting that he is on the roster right now. So maybe the 49ers are just going to play it out. Maybe just be like, hey, let's see how we're doing through training camp and preseason. And, we've seen when Dee Ford is out there, that he makes an impact on the game, and he can really beat those those blockers with that quick move, that excellent bend. So I think my thought process when it comes to Dee Ford is going to be very similar to that of Jason Verrett. I'm really not expecting anything, but if they're out there and if they can do anything, or if they can, and we know that both those guys can play at an extremely high level, then that's just gravy. But really coming into it, I'm not counting on them. But if they're out there, excellent news. Ultimately, the guy who I think will get predominantly and we'll see the most out there when it comes to those obvious passing down situations is going to be my guy, Samson Ebukam. So he's someone who really, really came along as the season, went along. The first 6-7 games last year, he was really we didn't really see him perform. We saw him miss a couple of tackles, things like that. But he had his first sack against the Bears. And then really we look at just the last half of the season when we include the postseason. That's when he stepped up. So we're talking in the final 8 games of the year. So the 3 playoff games and the final 5 regular season games, 6 sacks, 11 quarterback hits. We know how athletic Samson Ebukam is. And when we look at especially the first few games of the season, Justin Fields will need him to be out there to get after the athletic quarterback that is Justin Fields. Week 3 at Denver, Russell Wilson is now there. We know what he can do with his legs. And there's a lot of quarterbacks that we'll be facing throughout the year who are able to, make plays with their legs. Marcus Mariota in Atlanta, Patrick Mahomes can make plays. List kind of goes on and on. So I think Ebukam could really be in for a big, big year. He's still very young, still developing, and I'm really excited to see what he can do with another year under the tutelage of a guy like Chris Kasarik, and I think he can just absolutely be a potential Pro Bowl guy. Now, I don't know if he'll get enough snaps, but I think that he has that level and that ability if he can just really harness and focus in and make it happen. And there's going to be a lot of opportunities, in my opinion, for Ebukam, assuming that Dee Ford most likely isn't on the roster. So there you go, guys. I'm going to leave it right there. So to sum up real quick, I think we're going to see a lot of Kerry Hyder on those base downs and in some pass rushing situations. And then Samson Ebukam will be getting the bulk of the snaps when it comes to obvious passing down situations. Now, look, with the defensive line, it's a very fluid thing, and there's a lot of rotations that happen. So we're going to see the other guys mentioned, but we're talking mostly about the majority of the snaps, and especially in the most important situations. So let me know your guys' thoughts on this video here, on the players that we talked about. If you think I'm right, if you have differing opinions, I always love a good debate when it comes to the comment section. Do please like and subscribe to the video. It helps out the channel tremendously. A little bit later this week, probably on Wednesday, I will release my third video of the series talking about the 20 most valuable players. So we'll be talking about players 10 through 6. I'm also going to be appearing on the 49ers Ultimate Report with our Candlestick Report podcast on Wednesday. Fingers crossed that happens. And yeah, guys, I'm going to say two things right now. The butt counts, and I'm going to catch y'all on the flip side.